Welcome everybody for the event today. Today we're going to be discussing assessing India's abrogation of Article 370 and the journey ahead. And we have Joyeeta Basuji, who is the editor with Daily Mail.
The Sunday Guardian.
The Sunday Guardian. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Sunday Guardian today.
Okay.
She will be the moderator. Please carry on, Joyeeta ji.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Abhinav, and thank you, Usanas Foundation, for calling me here. Now, the topic, as was mentioned, assessing India's abrogation of Article 370 and the journey ahead. You see, last year on the 5th of August, the Narendra Modi government abrogated Article 370, thus fulfilling what has not only been an electoral promise for the Bharatiya Janata Party, but also an article of faith for the Sangh right from the 1950s. It's a historic move, and it came as a huge surprise for the sheer boldness, in fact, audacity shown, and at one stroke, 70 years of status quo was changed. It was shocking and it was surprising about, the way the speed at which this was executed. Now, in the process, did it deal a major body blow to terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir? 1 year on, how should we read the move? Was it just about fulfilling the promise that the BJP had made itself and its voters, or were there compelling security and strategic reasons as well? How will things play out in the future? What does it mean for the people of the valley in particular? What can be done to bridge the emotional gap between Srinagar and Delhi? Looking at it from a wider geopolitical perspective, will there be an impact on Kashmir of the withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan? Our panelists will share their valuable insights on these topics today. Joining us are Dr. Michael Kugelman, Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia, Woodrow Wilson International Center, Washington, D.C. Bashir Assad, who is a senior journalist from Kashmir and the author of K-Files and Beyond Article 370. And of course, Abhinav Pandya, who is the CEO of Usanas Foundation and has extensive field experience in Kashmir. He has written several articles, papers, and issue briefs on the Kashmir problem. His book on terror financing in Kashmir will be released soon. If I may invite Dr. Michael Kugelman to speak first. Dr. Kugelman, it's yours. Please speak.
Well, thank you very much to the distinguished chair, and I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak. It's a very distinguished panel and obviously a very timely topic, particularly this week. So I thought what I would do in my brief comments is I would leave the issues about why this move was made and what will the implications be for terrorism and all that. I'll leave that to the other panelists. I'm happy to weigh in later. But I thought that I would spend my time just speaking a bit about the broader geopolitical consequences emerging from this move 1 year ago. And I'll speak along three lines. First, I'll discuss the broader international response, how the international community has responded to this move. Two, I'll talk about the implications for India's relations with Pakistan. And then I'll speak about the implications for China, or India's relations with China. So, when the announcement was made on August 5th, 2019, there was a fair amount of reaction from the international community. There was extensive global press coverage. There was a fair amount of reaction from international analysts, certainly from human rights activists and folks like that. What was striking was that what happened in the days and weeks afterward was a fair amount of very specific, narrowly focused criticism from a number of key capitals, including in the West, that focused very specifically not on the actual revocation of Article 370, but more so the accompanying measures that came with it. So for example, in Washington, the senior leaders here were quite critical of the detention of political figures and critical of the communication ban. But beyond that, there was very little criticism, if any, in the United States and elsewhere that focused on the actual decision by India to revoke Article 370. Much of the criticism focused on the human rights issues accompanying it. And that's essentially how it's remained over the last year. I would argue that, to be sure, there's more focus, there's been more global debate and discussion around the Kashmir issue than there has been for quite some time. And I know that's not ideal for the Indian government, which would much prefer that the world not say much at all about this issue. But that certainly has been the case. And yet I would argue that, contrary to what some would argue, it's relatively limited, this international response. And I think this is a problem for Pakistan. I'll get to this in a moment. Pakistan has tried to generate this, tried to rally the international community around its side to try to pressure India. That you're not seeing. And I think what's quite striking 1 year later is that even after you had that criticism around the human rights issues, and despite all the noise in the world about Kashmir, there hasn't really been much follow-on, and much of the world has been fairly quiet. Even countries that you might expect to be more vocal in opposing what India did, because, for example, Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East, the Arab Gulf, they've said relatively little, with some exceptions, like Turkey, for example, but not much there. So that's my first point, that there's been a fair amount of reaction from the international community over the last year, but it really has been limited to focus on the human rights issues and not much more. And I think at this point, things have pretty much gone quiet in terms of international reactions. Second point I'll address is what did this move mean for India's relations with Pakistan? Well, I think it's quite clear that the India-Pakistan relationship had been experiencing one of its a particularly low ever since February of last year, when you had the Pulwama and Balakot crisis. And of course, India's decision to revoke Article 370 did not go down well in Pakistan, for reasons that we could all understand. And so this then led to a situation where Pakistan spent much of the last year trying to drum up. Pakistan essentially tried to capitalize on all this attention that the Kashmir issue was getting around the world, to try to build on that and try to get people to come, get countries, institutions to come to its side to support this idea of pressuring India for what it's been doing in Kashmir, for pressuring the world to call for new Indian policies in Kashmir. And it's been a largely unsuccessful effort. I think, and for the reasons that I already mentioned, it just there hasn't been all that much noise beyond this narrowly focused criticism. And I think that we could all understand why. Pakistan is a country that has, to be quite candid, a credibility problem. It's been like that for quite some time, and I think especially since the Bin Laden affair, his discovery in Abbottabad, I think that has really set back the world's trust in Pakistan, and it makes it unlikely that you'd have large numbers of key capitals giving Pakistan the benefit of the doubt and wanting to take its side on an issue like this, particularly one that's so sensitive and delicate. Whereas, but in contrast, certainly India has been criticized by some senior leaders, as I said before, for its policies in Kashmir. But on the whole, the world continues to see Kashmir the way India sees it, as an internal matter, or at most a bilateral issue, that one that doesn't really need, much less necessitate, any type of international mediation or involvement. And by contrast, again, India is viewed as a key geopolitical player, as an important market. And given that's how perceptions of India tend to play out around the world, there's a desire not to really rock the boat, so to speak, and to try to get involved in an issue that India would not want the world getting involved in. And I think that's probably the right way to go. Certainly, Pakistan, with help from its Chinese friend, has managed to get the issue discussed several times at the UN Security Council. But that's about the extent. And there had been, I think, a few statements released by the IOC. So there have been some statements here and there, some meetings at the UN, but not all that much. And I think the thing to watch out for is once Pakistan recognizes, if it hasn't already recognized, that it's this strategy to galvanize the international community around this issue, once it recognizes that that strategy is not working, what will it do next? Pakistan clearly is not happy about what happened. It rejects India's move to repeal Article 370. What might it do next? Because it doesn't really have many options. And I think that one thing to be concerned about is the possibility that Pakistan could really return to this tried and true tactic of infiltrating or encouraging militants to infiltrate themselves across the border to stir up trouble and stage attacks on Indian security forces. And I know that in India there's a view among many that this has already been happening. I would argue that Pakistan has taken a more restrained policy to this issue compared to what it was doing in the 1990s. And I think now, especially, and over the last few years, it's under a lot of pressure from the Financial Action Task Force to do everything it can to rein in terrorist financing and terrorist networks more broadly. So I think Pakistan has had to be careful about how it deals with these assets, these OET assets and these Jaish assets. But there's supposed to be a plenary session of the FATF in October. If Pakistan is not blacklisted, and I imagine it will not be blacklisted, it may feel that it would at that point have another opportunity to scale up this tactic. Clearly, that should be concerning for India. And I know that one of the justifications given by the Indian government for its decision to revoke Article 370 is to close off this quote-unquote gateway to terror. In other words, suggesting that by revoking Article 370, India will be better empowered to prevent Pakistan from being able to use these channels to infiltrate militants into Kashmir. I'm not sure if that's actually the case, particularly as I believe there's been data put out by the Indian government over the last year suggesting that there have still been infiltrations across the border from Pakistan. But I'll let other panelists discuss that issue. Third and final point I make before I wrap up is what the implications of the Article 370 repeal have been for China and India's relations with China. And this is a very important issue because I would argue that China was very displeased by this move because it entailed reorganizing Ladakh into a union territory of India. And of course, China has claims in Ladakh because of Aksai Chin and other claims. I would argue that the Article 370 repeal likely contributed to China's decision to stage these unusually robust provocations in Ladakh that began in May. I don't want to say is the only motivation, and of course, in some quarters, particularly in Pakistan, the argument would be that that was the only trigger. I don't think that's the case at all. But if you look at the dynamics of this India-China border spat, it seems like the proximate cause for China's decision to multiple incursions across the disputed border was this India's completion of this long strategic border road. But we all know that there have been many India-China border spats over the years, and they're frequently prompted by infrastructure building, and yet typically you haven't had the type of robust Chinese provocations that you had in this case. And I think that, to me, suggests that there are other factors at play driving China's behavior. And one of them, I do think, is the Article 370 repeal. China issued a very strongly worded statement on August 6th of last year, the very day after the move was made, condemning the move. And it also did not respond with happiness, so to put it mildly, when the Interior Minister Amit Shah made a speech about Aksai Chin. And then China also did not react happily to India's publication, the Indian government's publication, maps depicting new post-Article 370 repeal realities. Certainly correlation does not necessarily equal causation, but I think that there is reason to believe that the Article 370 repeal did play a role in China's decision to stage these robust provocations that led to this particularly serious crisis along the line of actual control, including that horrible, deadly clash several weeks ago that led to the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers. So I'll wrap up there and look forward to hearing their distinguished panelists. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Kugelman. Interesting points made. Abhinav, do you want to speak now?
Thank you, Dr. Kugelman. There were really interesting points. Some of the points which you raised, they had already, it used to figure into my mind, especially the one that most of the people criticized the detentions and the arrests, but not discussed much about the rationale of the measure taken by Delhi. So I think I would like to begin from that point. What ultimately motivated Modi government to go for such a step? For many, it may be a fulfillment of a long-held electoral promise of BJP, but I guess it is much more than that. Maybe the government and power could not convey those compelling strategic and security reasons which motivated it to go for such a step, because it still believes that they're in the election mode. But as far as I understand the situation, there were compelling strategic and security reasons which made it almost inevitable to abrogate Article 370. I'll begin from there. So almost an year before the abrogation of Article 370, I was in Kashmir researching for my book Radicalization in India and Exploration, and Kashmir was one of my case study. And I found that Kashmir was at a critical stage. Salafi radicalization was taking deep roots in Kashmir. Transnational terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they were taking deep roots in Kashmir. In high schools and middle schools, on the walls, you would find graffiti like Zakir Musa Zindabad. Now, let me tell you who is the Zakir Musa. Zakir Musa was a celebrity militant who inspired kids of 6 to 7 years of age. And Zakir Musa wanted to bring caliphate in Kashmir. In fact, he openly threatened the Hurriyat leaders that I'll execute you because you have betrayed the cause of Islam. Even Burhan Wani, for that matter, before his death, in his last video, he gave the cause of the caliphate. So Kashmir was going through a major ideological and a sentimental transformation. And we could see that the whole separatist movement had been entirely, almost overwhelmingly taken over by the Islamist and jihadist forces. Okay? There were two choices: either leave the state to all these jihadist or Islamist forces, or and just let them have their sway, or make an overwhelming political and an economic change and completely bring it to the mainstream of India. I think Delhi chose the later. Even if BJP government had not been there, or any other government, they would have had to do the same thing. Because if you look back, just imagine in 2008, Amarnath land row happens and the whole valley burns in fires. After that, in 2016, Burhan Wani, the man who espoused the cause of caliphate, he was executed. He was neutralized by security forces, and there's this whole valley burned in fires. In the very first week, 44 people died in the police encounters and police firing. And there was a huge, massive public unrest, protest across the valley. What happened from 2005 or from 2000 onwards to Kashmir? First of all, 2004 onwards, 2002 onwards, there emerged, when this LOC trade began, it was 2008 or 6, I guess, there emerged a very strong and deeply entrenched system of terror financing. And by 2008, I think the valley was already being disseminated with the tactics which were being used in Middle East, the Intifada tactics. After the Arab Spring, the news, because of the social media, the trends were percolating down in Kashmir. And Kashmir was gradually, very slowly becoming the part of the global pan-Islamist movement. If government of India had not gone for that kind of step, it would have been a completely different scenario, which may be a topic for a different debate. But I think here we can talk more about the factors which motivated and what happens in the future. I've taken some notes, just let me look at. Yeah. Yes. So Article 370, I personally feel that when many intellectuals and activists argue that Article 370 is abrogation of Article 370 is the violation of Kashmiri identity, but most of the people completely forget the fact that under the regime of Article 370, Kashmiri identity, which was primarily rooted in Sufi Islam and a very multicultural environment, was totally diluted, destroyed, and ruined. It was from 1970s when Islamist organizations like Jamaat-e Islami found firm roots in Kashmir. They began in 1942, but 1970s it started getting firm roots in Kashmir. And even Delhi is to be blamed for that, to counter Sheikh Sahab, to raise a bulwark against Sheikh Sahab, because Delhi always felt insecure of Sheikh Sahab and his autonomy ambitions. They tried to nurture radical Islamist organizations in 1970s, and very slowly and slowly they ended up ruining Kashmir's very diverse and a very tolerant liberal Sufi Islamic culture. After that, you see gradually even the mainstream institutions like the mainstream politics, banking institutions, the mainstream media, all of them were gradually becoming a part of this terror infrastructure run and I would say coordinated, financed and sponsored by Pakistan. We have had chief ministers in Kashmir who sheltered terrorists. We have had media people who are financed by dubious sources. And let me tell you, some of the people who are facing detentions and arrests these days, okay, I think it is the incompetence of the investigating agencies and the government that they could not frame these people previously in the charges of terrorism, drug smuggling, and hawala dealings. Most of these people are political prisoners right now, and they're getting a lot of international attention, which certainly, I mean, in any democracy, they would certainly get it. But people forget the fact that these people were heavily involved in a large number of them. For instance, a very young Kashmiri leader right now under detention. I mean, everyone knows, like there in Kashmir, the investigating agencies, that his vehicles were used to transport weapons, to transport drugs, even to ferry the terrorists. So the people who are facing political detentions and arrests, they could have been under very severe charges in the bars. And even now we are not learning the lesson. The new politicians who are coming up in Kashmir, okay, I think Delhi is again making the same compromises which it made in the past. The people who are coming up now, they are, many of them, ideally they should have been in the NIA interrogation rooms. We see politicians these days, mainstream politicians, professing loyalty to the cause of India, but they were once caught with RDX in their vehicles. So I think we have to again weigh and measure like what we want in the future. Abrogation of Article 370 was a much needed and a required step, but it was only a beginning. I repeat, only a beginning, which should have been followed by many ancillary and many, I would say, logical steps, which should have followed it. Okay, in terms of good governance, in terms of security measures, and various other areas. But unfortunately, I see that the government, Delhi has not paid enough attention to what should have been done after the abrogation of Article 370, especially the governance part. There's this widespread feeling that the state has been left to the diktats, whims and fancies of the bureaucrats, and the system has become very bureaucratized. There's this lack of accessibility to the people in power, and people also face bureaucratic apathy and arrogance. I feel that may be true to a large extent because I mean it's not something new. It has always been the case in Kashmir. The state level bureaucracy and even the central bureaucracy and the intelligence agencies, security forces have held sway in Kashmir. Because of the conflict, the implementation of the schemes and the governance was always in a bad shape, and the conflict gave a lot of power to people in the government. But I think in future it cannot be like that because if we really want to integrate Kashmir in an ideological, sentimental manner, we need an out-of-box thinking, and we need to have a firm outreach with the people of the Kashmir. There are genuine nationalistic voices who wanted Article 370 to go but never spoke out because of the fear of the terrorists. Now we need to empower them, incentivize nationalism, and bring them on board. And one more point before I just end my this brief is that I've been reading many articles which have come up lately, especially on Kashmir and more recently on the occasion of the 1 year of abrogation of Article 370. Many intellectuals and researchers, like proper professors, trained in research methodologies, they are making statements that Article 370 had nothing to do with terrorism. Article 370 prevented terrorism. Today, I think in today's Hindu only, there was an article by a very reputed professor. I must say that, I mean, such claims are baseless and fallacious because if you look at the facts, it was under the tutelage of Article 370. Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Because under the tutelage of Article 370 only, all the mainstream institutions like the JK Bank, they became a part of the terror funding ecosystem. I mean, you will be shocked and surprised if you know that the JK Bank awarded loans of 40 crores at the collateral of rupees 10 lakh, which is 1 million. And those loans were awarded on the recommendations of the separatist leaders, mainstream politicians, who then kept a share from that loan, which was, the later on transferred to the terrorist organizations, to the Islamist organizations. That's how Jamaat-e-Islami, a radical Islamist organization, became so powerful entity in administration, in academia, in courts, that they managed transfers, postings, appointments of the people in the government. And people who were appointed on their recommendations, they were very likely to have transferred a part of their proceeds or salaries to the terror infrastructure. And they exercised such an authority in terms of terror that people feared their presence. All that happened under the tutelage of Article 370. And the mainstream political parties more or less became the part of that same ecosystem. Delhi sent many interlocutors, but unfortunately, I don't come across a single case where the interlocutors sent by Delhi raised genuine concerns about the growing radicalization in Kashmir. Professors served as advisors in the government, but they hardly spoke about these grave concerns of Salafist and ideology and transnational terrorist organizations gaining roots in Kashmir, changing the entire mindset of the youth. In the future, I feel that militancy in Kashmir is going to undergo a massive change, because Pakistan has realized that the gone are the days when the old leadership of Hurriyat and Hizbul Mujahideen are going to be very important, because as we saw recently, there was an attack on Sayyid Salahuddin, the chief of Hizbul Mujahideen. Later on, it featured that Pakistan has realized that these traditional terrorist organizations in Kashmir are not going to be of immense use to them. So they are going to empower and strengthen the foreign terrorist group, mostly their key assets like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. And in an interesting development, especially after the withdrawal of American forces, Taliban is very likely to support Jaish in Kashmir. In a recent raid conducted by the NDS, that is Afghan intelligence services, on a Taliban camp, 10 Jaish terrorists were killed, which makes it very likely that the Taliban will be supporting Jaish in Kashmir. Interestingly, they believe in the same ideology of Islam, that is a Deobandi ideology. So it is pretty much likely that they will be aiding and supporting terrorist groups in Kashmir. Besides that, I see that Turkey is going to emerge as a very strong, I would say, factor in Kashmir, which is acting on multiple fronts. On one hand, it is capturing the hearts and minds of the youth in Kashmir, and in fact, the entire India, I would say, through its very extensive soft power outreach. And the current environment where Hindu nationalism is dominant is also aiding Turkey's efforts in wooing the Muslim community towards its side. On the other hand, Turkey, like the way it's aiding militant and terrorist organizations in Syria and Libya, is very likely to support and aid the terrorist groups in Kashmir, especially the Sadat commandos, the irregular army organized and managed by President, the Turkish intelligence. They are going to be active. And there is also a possibility, in fact, I think there were official reports in between that the militants in Kashmir could get easy access to the drones. And Turkey has emerged as a drone superpower, especially when it comes to their Bayraktar and Anka-S drones. So if the terrorists in Kashmir get access to drones, then it is going to be very difficult for the security forces in Kashmir. And lastly, I feel that there will be more suicide bombing attacks and IED attacks. The militancy will change in terms of tactics also. I think for now I'll end here, and Bashir Saab can continue from here.
Abhinav, I was actually surprised that whether it was me speaking in you, or it will be you now speaking in me. Anyway, thank you very much. You both, Dr. Michael and Abhinav, you both raised some important points, and I was very happy to listen from Dr. Michael that that I have written so far post 370 he has actually endorsed it that if there was hue and cry on the international in the, platforms, it was about the human rights issues, not about the main issue of 370 or a revocation of special status of Jammu and Kashmir. That's okay. But as you said it, Abhinav, that it was the compelling strategic and security issues that actually forced the government of India to go for such a major decision, such an unprecedented decision. I would say that, of course, the government of India was compelled, it was forced, the state was forced rather, by the actions of the Pakistan and of course its extension with Kashmir, no doubt about that. But it will be dishonesty on our part if we don't accept it that the decision was also because it had its ideological commitment and all that. It was there on the agenda of BJP for last 70 or 75 years. So the ideological moving was there that we cannot ignore. That is number one. But so far as Michael's point that the international platform, as far as the international community is concerned, see, Pakistan could not actually, it could not encash on whatever the Western media. You will forgive me, Dr. Michael. It was not the international community. It was actually the Western media which actually created that kind of hype and which forced some individuals and in certain cases some governments to come out against the Indian state for certain things, and it was particularly the media houses which are very vocal against the Indian state about many other issues, not only the Kashmir thing, about many other issues. That said, let me tell you something interesting, that Pakistan, if at all it could not now garner the support, it could not get the support of the international community to to rally them on the issue of so-called Kashmir dispute. But at least it has got some kind of breather by this decision. First, the attention was actually diverted to the Kashmiri diaspora, which I have been referring on and on in writings and all that. The narrative, the so-called separatist narrative exists in Kashmir. It exists because of the Kashmiri diaspora, which is there in Europe, which is there in USA, which is there in many other Central Asian countries and all that. It is in Gulf. This narrative, it sustains in Kashmir because of the Kashmiri diaspora in collaboration with whatever the foreign agencies there are who are proactive on or about Kashmir. This is something very important, and it actually gave that breather to Pakistan. You see, if you go the statistics, you will see that from August 2019 to Jan 2020, there was not a single militant attack on the army or security forces installations and all that, simply because Pakistan had told them to maintain a low profile for the time being, because they were able to mobilize that section of Kashmiri society which is living abroad, and the Pakistani people, of course, they were able to mobilize them, and it were those people who kept the Kashmir issue alive on in the Western media for the time being, and at the same time it provided a breather to Pakistan as far as it is accountability, and it is what it is called, it is argument to defend itself on many fronts before that financial action task force. They were already now very, very proactive, and it was expected that something big will be announced on their part. But as and when the decision was taken, and some attention was now diverted towards this by the Kashmiri diaspora, by the Western media, by Pakistani diaspora, they had some kind of relief, and the financial action task force actually they released that pressure over the Pakistan. So it got that kind of breather, number one. Number two, if at all Pakistan has got something to say, it was that now they were able to sell Kashmir in whatever the forms, in the context and in the protest. It is the indigenous uprising now in Kashmir. Halaki, the administration, the state, actually they maintained that law and order situation in Kashmir to the extent that not a single killing was actually recorded during those long period of 6 months. But the fact remains that Kashmir, Pakistan tried its best to sell it internationally that it is in the indigenous uprising, and everything will now they will sacrifice everything, and they will do everything to dislodge or disregard this decision, dislodge or revolt against the Indian state. That they played very well internationally. Let's accept it. But at the same time, as far as these compelling strategic and security issues are concerned, which Abhinav was referring to, let's be honest that it was actually, Abhinav left it halfway there, it was actually the 2008 uprising which actually provided the material to the people working in New Delhi, that now there should be something done to actually contain this menace of separatism in Kashmir. That I am actually looking at the developments of 2008, which we call locally as the Amarnath Land Row, and because of which Abhinav referred to that cross LOC trade and all that. It was celebrated by the people in Kashmir. It was celebrated by the political elites in Kashmir. But to my mind, it actually was the transition of thought processes back in New Delhi, that now the time has come that we should do something huge, and from there on, this turning was happening in the circles of policy players and all that, and think tanks, that something huge has to be should be done in Kashmir to prevent further deterioration of law and order situation, and further drifting away of the Kashmir from the Indian mainland, whether politically or emotionally or whatever. So that provided the basis to 2008. It provided the basis, and it also provided the basis for polarization in Kashmir. And from 2008, Kashmir actually it was now completely in isolation. It was now altogether a different place in the world, disconnected from the outer world, because it could not carry along its own people in its another region called Jammu, very important strategically and politically, as Abhinav said. So Kashmiri was on one side, it was isolating himself. On the another side, the sentiment of this separatism, it was crossing the limits. It became the new normal in Kashmir. Mindset, irrational political narratives, and this was actually this actually compelled it to go for such a drastic measure. Now coming to 2009, 19 attack on the security forces, that dastard Pulwama attack. Shortly after that attack, the then Home Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, while addressing some kind of rally in Kutwa district of Jammu and Kashmir, said that nobody on earth could stop now Indian state to resolve the Kashmir issue. Although people they could not give much attention to his statement, but to me it was something very, very huge, and it was a signal that something huge is going to happen in coming days, and that happened. But the bigger question remains how far it has helped the Indian state to address the so-called Kashmir issue as far as its internal dimensions, as far as its relationship with the people of Kashmir, with the people of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. That remains the important question which is still unanswered. That demands answer from the state, and then that demands answer from the August gathering which is here, discussing this issue, very important issue on its first anniversary. Nobody was expecting that the terrorism will stop altogether in Jammu and Kashmir if Article 370 is abrogated and if Jammu and Kashmir is politically integrated with the Union of State. It was only a political statement to me, because the political establishment, they had to explain, they had to justify this action on the floor of House and outside. They went for it. Now they constructed this notion that this action will end the terrorism. It has not. No, it will not. It has not. It will not. In fact, it has actually given its. No, it has revived it in many forms, in many dimensions also. I mean, if you look at the statistics and look at the formation of the militant organization in Kashmir, some 4 or 5 new organizations have come into being since August 2019, and 3 organizations which were now nowhere in picture, which were there active in early 90s, 3 militant organizations have been revived. That simply means 5 to 7 new militant groups or terrorist groups, you call them, they have now come into being. They are there now. They have added to the figures there in Jammu and Kashmir. And if you look at the statistics of local youth who have joined the militant ranks during this 1 year, it is again alarming. But thank God, since last 2 months, the trend of joining the militant ranks, it has somehow that curve has flattened now. So we are expecting that that trend will somehow stop anywhere in near future. But the fact remains that anger, that frustration by the radicalized groups in Kashmir having irrational political narratives, that anger is still there, that has not been addressed. So what were the expectations? The expectations, as Abhinav referred to very briefly, was that at least the government of India now on will ensure that people in Jammu and Kashmir will get a very which will actually enhance and expedite its delivery system. That has not happened. Corruption is it is rampant. I have written it anywhere that aliens are actually ruling the alienates in Kashmir now. if you call so, because the people you have now appointed as advisors and all that, they don't know the basics of Kashmir. They have no idea about how to deal with the people. They have no idea about how to reach out to the people in Kashmir. I mean, in Jammu and Kashmir, it is not about Kashmir alone. The anger is more in Jammu region now, because there is nobody to talk to people. There is nobody to listen to the grievances of the people. That is not happening. That was the one legitimate channel we were expecting, that the government of India will be addressing the so-called alienation through reach out, alienation through better administration, alienation through better avenues. That has not happened. Number one. Number two, second important thing which actually generated some kind of hope in many large sections of Kashmir society and also in Jammu, was that now there will be some kind of investment happening. That has not happened. Now the counter argument is that first it was that the clamp down because of abrogation, and then it is the lockdown because of this COVID-19 pandemic. But honestly, there are certain apprehensions that even if you can issue some very, very controversial orders during the days of pandemic, how can you justify that it was pandemic and we can't do anything on ground? These are certain questions which are still unanswered, and which have actually raised some kind of apprehensions, which have actually added to the confusion on ground in Kashmir. I mean, confusing signals are being given. I had in Kashmir in Kashmir beyond 370. I have actually elaborated on it. Now the ball is in now the New Delhi's court. Now they have to decide whether they want to punish the entire population in Jammu and Kashmir for the wrongs committed or for the wrong narratives constructed by a political elite, which were their own people. Whether they want to punish or whether they actually want to own people by punishing the wrongdoers. Anyway, we appreciate, and former Chief Minister Umar himself admitted it very, very recently in his one of the tweets. He said that if Kashmir celebrated anything, it was their detention, the detention of former 3 chief ministers and all that. And this is something surprising, and this detention actually was played out something very, very huge, hugely in the international forums which Dr. Michael was referring to. Now, it was this illegal detention, so-called illegal detention of political elites of Jammu and Kashmir. And interestingly, Dr. Michael will agree with me, nobody talked about the separatist leaders during this 9, 10 or 11 months. It was not even the international media. Yes, if you had got something to discuss or got something to actually give some kind of unsettled for the time being, the people, the policy planners in New Delhi, it was actually the arrest of the so-called mainstream political leaders. No mention of Kashmiri separatists. Again, an encouraging sign for the Indian state in Kashmir. That's okay. But now, there are many questions which Abhinav has referred to, now how the terrorism will sustain, how Jaish and other ISIS and Al-Qaeda, what will be there. I don't think I should be, I should deal with this subject in this session. Maybe if Joyeeta, if she asks me in the next round, I may be able to say something about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Assad, so well. And of course, what you're talking about is a trust deficit, and there is no doubt that the government of India has not been able to, cover that gap. And there's a lot to do, and especially when it comes to Jammu, I think it's also primarily political in nature, because you see that is how it happens in the rest of the country as well. I think there's a slight difference in terms of Jammu's anger and Kashmir's anger with the way government of India is working, because you see Jammu is more mainstream, the anger is also more political, we vote out because, but perhaps that is not yet the case in Kashmir. But having said that, I wanted to just ask Dr. Kugelman one question. You see, the kind of narrative building that we saw after removal of Article 370, I mean, what explains the Western media peddling a very pro-Pak narrative? That is how it came across to us in India. It was a very skewed, one-sided narrative. Was it because the Pakistan was very good at peddling the narrative and government and India failed badly, or is there more to it? Dr. Kugelman, please, if you can say a few words about it.
Thank you. Great question. Yeah, I think it's complicated. I do think that the Indian government could have done a better job in its messaging and its public messaging when it first announced the repeal of Article 370. I think there was a lot of references to this being, an internal matter, and it shouldn't be seen as a big deal. But there wasn't really much elaboration beyond that. And naturally, the media being what it is, it's going to pick up on issues and developments that it thinks will sell well and be marketable. So the fact that you have the world's largest democracy cracking down significantly by arresting all these political leaders and business leaders and others, and imposing communications bans in this age where communications are so important, naturally the media will pick up on that type of thing. But I think that later, it took several weeks or even several months, but I did sense efforts by the Indian government, by the diplomatic community, to try to tell its story or explain its reasoning more explicitly and more emphatically in the days and weeks after that move was made. So I think that one could perhaps fault the Indian government for not being more clear and explicit as to what its reasoning was and why it did what it did and why it should be seen as an internal matter. But that said, at the same time, the optics for those on the outside, particularly those that may not be extremely well versed in the history of the Kashmir dispute, naturally they would start with the present. They wouldn't necessarily think about the context of the past, about what happened in the past with the situation with the Pandits and all that. The focus would be on the present tense. It doesn't have anything to do with Pakistan, I don't think. Pakistan, as I suggested before, has its own credibility problems. It doesn't really succeed in efforts to get the international community to take its side and believe what it's saying. So I think this is just a case of the media, the Western media responding in the way that it did, based on what it was seeing on the ground, knowing what would be important or what it would think would be important for its readership, and not necessarily delving into the history and all that. So bottom line is, no, I don't think it has anything to do with Pakistan. I think it's a combination of how the media perceives what's important and what stories should be highlighted in their coverage based on what readers would think and what our audience would think, and also the fact that the Indian government, initially at least, didn't do as good of a job as it could have with the messaging.
Okay. Mr. Assad, do you want to say anything on this? And anybody has any questions, please send them. Mr. Assad, I wanted to ask the same question to you.
What was the question?
No, basically I was asking about, since you talked about the Western media at that time, and of course, why is it that kind of Pakistan had its say? I mean, that is how it was perceived in India. Or is it primarily because of the Kashmiri diaspora being very active? What is it about?
Yes. Two important factors. One, yes, that as far as this information warfare is concerned, Dr. Michael would agree with me that Pakistan is far ahead of India as far as this, creating some kind of information warfare on social media, on mainstream media. This is one thing. Second thing is that the messaging, the packaging of the abrogation of the Article 370, the messaging was not clear. The notions, the narrative created on the floor of House, it was based on three things. One, that terrorism in Kashmir will end. Second, that Kashmir will be integrated with the mainland emotionally and politically. Constitutionally, integration has happened, no doubt about. And three, Kashmir see now new phase of development. It has faced a discrimination. Certain sections of Kashmir, now Kashmir state, I mean Jammu and Kashmir state, they have faced a discrimination, and now that discrimination will end, and there will be an era of development. It will usher into a new era of development. On all the three promises, you could not build a political slogan on these narratives. You could not package it, and you could not sell it to the people, because you left it halfway. Once you are done with the Article 370, you stop talking about investment, you stop talking about giving fresh, efficient administration to the people in Kashmir. You stop talking about sending investors to Jammu and Kashmir. You altogether forgot about it. That is the reason that there were some loopholes, and Pakistan was very quick in exploiting those certain lacunas and those certain loopholes which you left, not because of many other things, because you got engaged, as Michael referred to. There was border skirmish with China. China also tried to play some kind of tricks and games. Now, as far as Kashmir is concerned, and as far as the containing terrorism is concerned, it hampered many processes in the Security Council. Also, that I need not to refer, because everybody knows about it. So the basic thing is that the packaging was missing, number one, and number two, of course, you sent some confusing signals to the people in Jammu and Kashmir. That somehow gave some kind of space to the Pakistan and its extension in Kashmir to exploit the situation. That is the answer why Western media actually fished in the troubled waters in Kashmir, because there were many people available there who exploited the situation because of the lacunas, because of the loopholes left by the policy planners in New Delhi, and that is why the music was faced for quite some time, though it has now somehow exertion is there now, it has exhausted. But the basic three things, the basic three premises on which you build the public opinion to actually abrogate, three premises, honestly, they are yet to see, they are yet to be realized as far as Jammu and Kashmir. Yeah, Joyeeta.
Thank you so much. I think there was a question about, how can you, from the audience about, how can you possibly talk about mainstreaming of the people when you have got your internet shut for such 1 year and all. So would one of you like to answer that question?
Abhinav should answer it.
This internet ban on internet, this has come across, this is still an issue that rankles with Kashmiris. Okay, so the question is about, how can you talk about mainstreaming and, democracy when you do something like this? This is a
Thank
question from
you.
the audience.
Sure. I would love to answer this question. Well, internet ban is there. It has been on for last 1 year, and certainly I do admit that it is a serious, I mean, a major cause of disappointment, frustration, anger. But it is, I think it's a temporary thing. Certainly, as soon as the security situation improves, it will be lifted. But integrating Kashmiris with the rest of the India is a much bigger question. I feel that in Kashmir the biggest issue, like separatism, this whole separatist narrative is pretty much created and orchestrated artificial narrative. But what's genuine is the people's real governance problems, the cause of corruption, and ensuring the dignity of the people. So what the government needs to do right now is to reach out to the people. Recently, I wrote a paper on the outreach strategy and measures. I feel that, I mean, it can, so, I mean, I'm not talking about a formal political dialogue process. That may be the domain of the government. But, I mean, if the officers posted at collectors and SPs or DCs in the districts, if they start reaching out to the people, talking to the youth of Kashmir, and just convincing them, explaining them what are the benefits of the abrogation of Article 370 and what can be the new vision for the Kashmir, I think it will be a good beginning. Secondly, improve the governance. Governance is in a very bad shape. Try to be polite, humble, and nice to the people of the Kashmir. Thirdly, speak the truth. I mean, here what I mean to say is that, for long, intelligence agencies have held a sway in, I mean, have been very powerful in Kashmir, and for some tactical gains, they empowered people who were separatist in their ideology, who were even anti-national. But this is the time where you have to give a clear message that if you are for a democratic, multicultural, tolerant, and liberal India, we have a warm embrace for you. But if you are for religious extremism, if you are for terrorism, jihadism, then there will be harsh action against you. So this is the time to speak the truth, get people along with you, and yes, create jobs. Unemployment is a major problem in Kashmir, and most of the people, they are dependent on the government jobs. For the youth in Kashmir, there are two kinds of ideas. They see a militant with a gun and a security official with the gun. So for them, craving power in life, even if it comes, either it comes through a militant or through a position in the government, that becomes an ideal. I think we need to change this mindset. Kashmiri boys, youngsters should be, I mean, they can explore their talents in the field of entrepreneurship, creativity, very creative people. People are very bright in academics. So those new avenues of job creation can be explored so that the burden pressure on the demand for the government jobs can be reduced, can be mitigated. So I think these are the areas. And yes, one more thing. Your national mainstream media, the way it covers Kashmir, it is very biased and I would say very extremist, racist, in fact. So there is no reason to demonize Kashmiris on the national mainstream media. Okay? And the approach has to be nuanced. We are dealing with a state which has been going through a conflict for last 30 years. So you can imagine the trauma, the stress, the collective psychological depression which the state is going through. So it needs a very special treatment, and all the actors in the society, the politicians, the media, the academia, the human rights activists, they have to realize that they have to be responsible, accountable in the roles which they are playing. The approach has to be very nuanced. Even the activists, I must say, they cannot be misguiding Kashmiris. For instance, this question of demographic change. Like nowadays, I see there are a lot of rumors of demographic change in Kashmir, demographic change in Kashmir. Now, let me be very clear. It's not India which is staging or whichever wanted to exercise a demographic change. Initially, it began with the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits. Pak-sponsored terrorists forced Kashmiri Pandits out of Kashmir Valley. Then recently, we hear about the reports of large amounts of lands being taken around Jammu and colonizing them with the Kashmir-based people with the idea of making Jammu a Muslim-dominant place. Thirdly, there are attempts going on in Doda Kishtwar region to exercise a similar Kashmiri Pandit kind of exodus of the Hindus who are remaining there. And on the other side, in POK, in Gilgit-Baltistan, we have seen this huge demographic change happening there. So I think the Kashmiri people, the boys should be told that, well, India has no such intentions of effecting any demographic change, and whatever demographic change has taken place in Kashmir, it has been financed, sponsored and coordinated by the terrorist extremist separatist forces. I mean, can you imagine Rohingyas coming all the way from Assam and Bengal to Kashmir, settling in Jammu, settling in Kargil? This is demographic change. So I think we have to counter the truth with facts and with a very rational, biased approach. It should not sound like, as if it is coming from a particular political ideology or a religious ideology. It has to be a very rational and a balanced narrative. This is what I have to say.
Thank you, Abhinav. Now, are any questions coming? Do send in your questions. But before that, Abhinav, I have a question about, since you are talking about Turkey, and since you see there have been reports about how China is now talking to terrorists based in Pakistan and coming from Kashmir about creating a problem in Jammu and Kashmir. So are we looking at China as a player as well when it comes to this area? And I mean, if you can, talk a little more about what Turkey is doing.
Sure, I would say, I think I'll discuss China and Turkey both. Okay, first of all, let's discuss Turkey. Okay? So Turkey, Caliphate Erdogan or Caliph Erdogan or Sultan Erdogan, that is how I would like to address him. So there is this very, I would say, hidden, or now it's more overt desire to kind of restore a de facto caliphate and claim the leadership of the Ummah, the Muslim community in the world. President Erdogan knows that in the Middle Eastern world, he will definitely face major opposition from the Arab countries who have been the custodians of the holy sites of Islam and have been dominant players in the Middle East. But in South Asia, there's this huge, massive chunk of the Muslim community, and we have had traditional relations with Turkey, with the Ottoman Caliphate. So there's a very strong, major chance of Erdogan finding a major support in India. I'll just go back to 1920, the Khilafat movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi, and the Khilafat movement was essentially, the purpose was to restore the caliphate. It was against the dismemberment of caliphate by the Allied powers after the First World War. And even before that, after the revolt of 1857, a large part of the Muslim nobility migrated to Turkey for various reasons. So we have had those historical ties. And here, President Erdogan knows that the best way to win the hearts and minds of Muslims in South Asia is to raise the issues of Kashmir. So this is one reason he is reaching out to Kashmir, and in multiple ways. First is through scholarships being awarded to Kashmiri young students. Many of them are studying in Kashmir, in Turkey now, through various scholarship programs, and the various clerics are being invited. Recently, they were meeting with the Jamaat-e-Islami leadership in POK, inviting them to Turkey and discussing the strategy. And similarly, in Kashmir, in the Indian-administered Kashmir also, there are strong chances of Turkey supporting the militant organizations and even the Islamist groups. In this new style of militancy, I feel that this new, especially the youngsters, which share this pan-Islamist ideology, but they are very trained in the technology and this, global international affairs. Okay? So they are going to play an important role. And Turkey is working on the multiple fronts. On one hand, it is approaching the Islamist organizations, and on the other hand, it is approaching the educated class, the more liberal, secular class among the Muslims through its soft power approach. Like recently, this TV soap opera series, Ertugrul Ghazi, it has become a massive hit in Kashmir, because I mean, nothing wrong in that. It may be an absolutely amazing serial, and but the purpose behind spreading it or purpose behind propagating it is not very sincere, I must say. I mean, it has some very overt geopolitical ends. Besides Turkey, I must say there's this another new phenomenon happening in Kashmir, and that is of Shia radicalization. And the recent souring of relations between India and Iran and the increasing bonhomie between China and Iran should be read in this context. And I must say, as far as my sources confirm, Chinese officials, very senior diplomats, they are reaching out to prominent Shia leaders in Kashmir. And Iran already has a very strong penetration in Kashmir among the Shia community. If you go to Kargil, the city, which is for 6 months completely shut down, it shut off from the rest of the India because of the snow, is full of hoardings which display Ayatollah Khomeini. There are umpteen numbers of clerics visiting from Iran, the students, Shia community members visiting Iran for their religious studies. And I have even come across people who are in touch with Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, and some people even claim to have fought in Syria against ISIS. So this is going to be a major problem because Shia community has traditionally been supportive of India, but now the sentiments of separatism and anti-India, this sentiment is emerging very strongly. And here in this context, Turkey will play an important role because Turkey is not, focusing on the Shia-Sunni sectarian differences and all. Unlike Saudi, Turkey is creating overall a very unified Muslim identity in which it will try to get all the sects together on various fronts, and that can be a very difficult situation for India to handle unless it comes out with a good counter narrative and reaching and a strategy to reach out to people and a strategy to I would say engage the clerics and religious authorities in Kashmir, just to promote the Sufi Islam. Lastly, coming to China, I must say China has always been active in Kashmir. And it is in fact the proxy war in Kashmir which is happening. China played an important role as far as motivating Pakistan and activating these proxy assets. The idea is to keep India busy in Kashmir with all these local conflicts and play the real game in the Indian Ocean, empowering its navies, encircling India with the different naval bases. Because in the Indian Ocean, China has major stakes. Near the Malacca Straits, all the choke points lie, and the Indian Navy has always held a very strong control in the Indian Ocean. So China feels that that unless it grabs the Indian Ocean or converts it into a Chinese lake, it cannot control or it cannot have a complete domination over India. So the idea is to keep India busy in Kashmir. Secondly, China gets all its intelligence from the Pakistani proxies working in Kashmir. Thirdly, of late, especially after the abrogation of Article 370, Chinese have become much more active in the Kashmir operations. Recently, in fact, I was told by some people and very confidential and authoritative sources that Chinese are even visiting the terror training camps in the POK, where they are meeting the terrorist commanders of the groups controlled by Pakistan, like Lashkar and Jaish, not the Kashmiri terrorists, the indigenous Kashmiri. So I think it's going to they are going to be much more active in Kashmir, and even the recent escalation on the Ladakh border. I mean, if what I read into the situation is totally different. As of late, Pakistan has infiltrated a large number of foreign terrorists, highly trained commandos, and they are not acting. They are not coming out. Most of the militants who have been neutralized in the recent encounters, they are local Kashmiris. So if there's a massive infiltration of FTs coming into Kashmir, hiding, why are they not coming out and staging attacks? Maybe there is a possibility that China wants to escalate situation on the eastern border. India gets involved on that side, and here stage an internal kind of a major public protest or a revolt with all these FTs, and on the other side, Pakistan opens a second front and corner India in a very difficult situation to handle. So, I mean, these are the things which I would certainly like to explore more, but we don't have enough time. But India will have to face more and more international actors in Kashmir in the future.
Okay, thank you, Abhinav. There is a question to you. It says that how can the trust of people be restored? And what about the political process which is missing since last 1 year? Basically, I guess when the political process is missing, how can people's trust be restored at a time like this when there is no representation of the people when there is in the government?
Well, I must say, talk to Kashmiris. Kashmiri people love to talk, but first of all, you have to understand the psychology, the mindset of the Kashmiri people. Like, they are the people who have excelled well in arts, literature, people with an intellectual temperament. They are not people like who would want to fight. They have a very rich culture. So first of all, understand that, reach out to them, engage them in good conversations. And I mean, you have to engage good leaders, good politicians with a statesman-like approach. Leaving a state to the whims and fancies of arrogant bureaucrats who go there and behave like viceroys is not going to help you out. This is a special case. where you need, people, good politicians. Like I remember, Mr. Satyapal Malik was in Kashmir, and Mr. Satyapal Malik, I think on one occasion, in Shopian and Pulwama, he could fix the electricity issues local. So the Shopian and Pulwama, which is a hotbed of militancy, there people were raising slogans, Governor Saab Zindabad, Governor Saab Zindabad. I mean, victory to Governor Saab, which in English translation, it would mean that for Dr. Kugelman. Okay. So, I mean, can you imagine in a place which is a hotbed of militancy, where it is, I mean, we generally assume that the people hate India on a small matter of small issue of, fixing electricity problem, people would just, chant slogans in your favor. This speaks a lot that people have genuine governance and very basic problems of, you have, people facing snow covered roads in front of their houses. If people fall ill, they cannot visit the hospitals. Even if, the bureaucrats which we are sending to Kashmir, they should be people with a mission, people with special mission. Right now, I feel that most of the people, the advisors, and the district commissioners and SSPs who are working in Kashmir, they have no idea about the culture of Kashmir. They don't want to talk to people. They wouldn't know the difference between Jamaat-e-Islami and Jamiat-e-Ahle Hadith. They wouldn't know the difference between Devbandis and Barelvis. It cannot work like that. Good. I mean, we have to send people who are, there are many young IPS and IAS officers, they can be given a 3-month training program before they join Kashmir for their assignments. And once they join, they can reach out to them. There's this grievance cell working in Kashmir, it can be activated and immediately redress the grievances. Target Kashmir University. So Kashmir University is a hub of, Jamaat-e-Islami. All the appointments, transfers, and postings are very rigidly controlled by Jamaat-e-Islami. I know a professor, he's a Muslim, he's a local boy from Kashmir, from Srinagar. He wanted to do a research project on Jamaat-e-Islami, and his efforts were scuttled, he was shunted, he was marginalized. Now the government has to look into those matters, provide good facilities, bring in professors from the rest of the India, bring Kashmiri students to the rest of the India, make them interact with people in IIT, IIM, send them to universities abroad. Bring Kashmiri officers, administrative officers, police officers on deputations to the rest of the India, other states in India. Send them abroad. Organize, events in Kashmir, discussions, I would say even Bollywood should be encouraged to go and visit Kashmir. So this is the way, I mean, as coming to political process, I must say that political process, the mainstream politics was a robust shield of India against the terrorism, against the separatist forces. But in 1996, when Farooq Abdullah Saab was elected as chief minister, it was a great moral victory of India against Pakistan-sponsored intense militancy. But then in course of time, the same mainstream political parties ended up becoming the part of the terrorist infrastructure. I mean, I don't want to take names, but we have had chief ministers in Kashmir. Bashir Saab would be knowing it very well. The chief ministers who sheltered militants in Kashmir, in their houses, who escorted militants to the Wagah border in their jeeps, the political workers ferrying weapons, militants in Kashmir. There's this huge drug money coming in Kashmir, drug smuggling. You have proper mainstream politicians engaging in drug smuggling. We don't want that kind of mainstream politicians. There are people at the grassroots level who are honest. I mean, maybe they don't love India, okay, or they have genuine grievances, but they are honest. At least go and speak to them. Be truthful to them. We can empower them. Like there was this political party, Jammu Kashmir Awami Forum, which was active in the recent past. The party, I mean, which included people who were teachers, who were, I would say, cobblers, who were in small petty businesses, not people with great power connections. They organized a march and a procession against, in the favor of the abrogation of Article 370. And you would be surprised, some of our IS officers sent by, Delhi, they refused to cooperate. No, it will be a big security menace. It can't be like that. So we have to find out genuine political voices, empower them, and just I would say be truthful. And we have to revive mainstream political process, because that is the strength of India. India is a democratic country, and Kashmiri identity, cultural, religious identity must be preserved. We have to assure Kashmiris that there will be no demographic change. All their economic rights will be preserved. If there is an investment coming, it is for the betterment of Kashmiris. Wherever Marwari investors have gone to the other states of India like Assam, or where Gujarati investors have gone, they have not captured and occupied the resources. They have boosted and strengthened the economy. Same thing will happen in Kashmir also. When the investors will go to Kashmir, they will not, trample upon the religious and cultural rights of the Kashmiri people. They will simply furnish good jobs. And once you have a stable, peaceful life, there won't be any incentive to join militancy. And one last thing, I must say, you cannot integrate Kashmir unless we counter Pakistan, because the entire militancy, the terrorism in Kashmir is controlled and run from POK, from Islamabad, from Rawalpindi. So India has to be very firm and decisive against Pakistan. Okay? See, the local boys who are joining militancy in Kashmir, there has to be a reach out initiative. I must say, if we can make them surrender to official and unofficial measures, it will be a great idea. But against the FTs and against Pakistan, India has to be very bold and very aggressive. Even if that requires going and destroying terror training camps in Pakistan, just go ahead with that. Be ruthless in that. To understand, we have to make it very, very costly for the ISI masterminds to sponsor terror in Kashmir. And even to the international actors who are trying to act nasty in Kashmir, like Turkey and all, we have to show a firm, decisive, and a ruthless face that we are not going to tolerate it. All the organizations which are working as proxies for Pakistan, like Jamaat-e-Islami, Government of India banned it, but it cannot continue the action further. Their second and third rung leadership dispersed into the rural areas. Now the people are scared of them. The Jamaat-e-Islami cadres are helping the foreign terrorists. They are strengthening them. They are helping them with logistics, with shelter. Government of India should prepare the dossier for all such leaders, the Jamaat-e-Islami cadres, get them out of Kashmir, put them in jail in some other part of India on the charges of terrorism, radicalization, whatever. Then only you'll be able to integrate Kashmiris. Because unless such pro-Pakistani extremist elements are there, Kashmiris will be scared of coming out openly in the favor of India and openly expressing their desire for peace and prosperity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Abhinav. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, fine. I have a quick question for Dr. Kugelman. It's about if Joe Biden government comes in the US, will that government be more vocal, or rather quite vocal, because the Trump administration has not really been vocal about the Kashmir issue? Will that government be vocal about Kashmir comes to India? Okay, no, I asked a question to Dr. Kugelman about the possibility of a Joe Biden government coming in. What happens after that? Will the Joe Biden government be talking about Kashmir, raising the Kashmir issue? Because the Democrats have always been a little more, they have been proactive when it comes to, at least they have been talking about it. Is Dr. Kugelman there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sorry, I lost my connection for a moment. So to your question, I think that certainly when it comes to U.S. policy toward India, there's a fairly strong bipartisan support in favor of a deep U.S.-India partnership. And so I think that it is unlikely that if Joe Biden were to become president, that U.S. policy toward India and by extension toward Kashmir were to change. I do think that there's a good chance that Biden will have incorporated into his campaign and perhaps into his administration, if he's elected, some of the more progressive leftist advisors that had previously been associated with Bernie Sanders. And as you know, Bernie Sanders had been for unusually critical of India and Kashmir in the context of U.S. politicians. So I do think that if there were to be a President Biden, he would perhaps be a bit more critical of India than certainly than Trump has. But I really don't think that the contours of the relationship, the partnership would change that much. I really don't think that you would have Biden coming down hard on India. I certainly don't think that he would be criticizing India for revoking Article 370. I just think there may be a bit more noise from a Biden White House than a Trump White House on criticism of the human rights violations. I think that's about it. I just think that we've reached a point, and this is not new. This has been the case for really several years, even perhaps several decades, that there's a fair amount of support across the aisle, and Republican and Democrats alike, that India is a key strategic partner, and that the U.S. needs to do what it can to strengthen that relationship, particularly in the context of the China factor. And I think it's China. There's also strong bipartisan support in favor of taking a harder line on China. Now, that's not to say that if Biden were to be president, that you would have the same type of witheringly critical and harsh rhetoric on China that you hear from Trump. But a Biden White House would take a hard line on China and would view it as a strategic competitor and a threat that would need to be countered. And certainly India is viewed by Washington as a key partner in that effort to push back against China through the Indo-Pacific strategy. So this all suggests to me that when it comes to the issue of Kashmir, the last thing that a President Trump or a President Biden would want to do is to start pushing India on the Kashmir issue in a way that it could antagonize New Delhi and imperil a relationship that is viewed as a very important one and a very strategic one by people here in Washington, both on the Republican and the Democrat sides. And I believe we had heard some messaging from Biden on the campaign trail, or the virtual campaign trail, where he has said some things about India that are very complimentary. He's called for a strong and deep partnership and all that. So I think this is a simple issue. Certainly, many foreign policy issues in Washington are polarizing and partisan. If you look at an issue like Iran, or an issue like Cuba, or climate change, there would be sharp divides between Republicans and Democrats. But I think when it comes to India and how to relate with India and how to handle the Kashmir issue, absolutely, both sides see things eye to eye. And certainly, just to finally to disabuse those of the notion that believe that President Trump had actually called for mediation on Kashmir. He had not. This is something that we hear from Pakistan quite frequently. President Trump has said multiple times that if both India and Pakistan were to ask for him to mediate, then he would. And we know that that's not something that India wants. So in that sense, I don't see his offer as much of an offer at all. And before I wrap, just a very quick point on the very interesting points made by my co-panelists on this issue of mainstreaming Kashmiris into India. Speaking as an outside analyst, someone who is not from Kashmir, not from India, I think it's going to be a lot harder to do that than many may think. And if we look at the Kashmir Valley, for example, I just think that that area that area has been lost. That there's not much that can be done to conciliate those folks there, those communities. The revocation of Article 370 was something that, as perceived by so many Kashmiri Muslims living in the Kashmir Valley, that was essentially a unilateral effort to formally bring people, to make people a part of a state, part of a country that they so despise. And certainly, as we heard from our colleagues, that yes, with time, with dialogue, with efforts to win trust, maybe that dynamic could change. But I think that may be more true with parts of Kashmir outside of the valley. The valley is just such a huge challenge, and I do not think that separatist sentiment has abated at all. If anything, it has grown over the last year. And that's going to be a huge challenge for the Indian government. And as a start, it really needs to, in my view, demonstrate a true commitment to dialogue with local stakeholders inside Kashmir. And I don't know if there's enough trust. I don't know if perceptions within the Kashmir Valley, perceptions of people there, of the Indian government are sufficient enough that we could allow for that to be anything realistic. We may have to wait until the next government in New Delhi where you can talk about things like that. So I don't mean to be skeptical, but I'm just trying to be practical. Again, speaking as an outside analyst here.
Thank you, Dr. Kugelman. Before we conclude, Mr. Assad, do you also believe that the valley cannot be brought back, cannot be mainstreamed?
There are arguments and counter arguments about whether you can bring back Kashmir to the mainstream, or whether it is drifting away from the mainstream. I suppose we could look at the situation through both angles. One is that, of course, if you don't have a reach out mechanism in place, if you don't have brainstorming over how to reach out to how to address at least the internal problems we have in Kashmir, now which are actually now, which we can say that they originate from that soil. That is one important sector. Second sector is what is being imported there, how to address that kind of that issue. Then again, my focus has always been that I don't know how you are going to deal with Pakistan, how America is going to behave with you in next couple of years, or if the government changes there, or how China is going to behave. Everybody has a strategic interest. Joyeeta, it is answer to your question also. If China is now somehow close to Pakistan, America has to be now on Indian side. It has been happening since many years, and it will happen for so many years from here also. So the point is that if you want to address the internal problems originating from the soil of Kashmir, you need to put in place a mechanism to first address the grievances. To address the grievances as far as the providing of efficient administration is concerned, as far as addressing the issues confronting the youth in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, as far as governance is concerned, as far as connecting the people of Jammu and Kashmir with the mainland is concerned, because that is one of the biggest problems you are facing in Jammu and Kashmir. So you should at least be having some kind of mechanism in place, some kind of policy planning to address the internal dimensions of that problem. Externally, how you will be dealing with Pakistan. Dr. Michael will suggest you certain things, and Abhinav will be shedding light on this. But my focus is, if you have certain plan to move from here, then you should be doing it very fast, because as somebody told that the space there, you have a huge vacuum. If you don't occupy that space, if you don't fill that vacuum, somebody else will come and he will create problems for you.
Thank you, Mr. Assad. Abhinav, you want to make a quick concluding point?
Dr. Kugelman, I think I really agree with you on that. But even being an outsider, you made a very valid point, as if you have visited Kashmir Valley, that it is certainly going to be extremely difficult for India to win back the trust. I never denied that. Certainly we do need special measures to bring back the people and win back their trust. Okay? But before I end, I would just leave with one message to the Kashmiri people. I have many friends in Kashmir. I have traveled in the smallest areas, in places like Palhalan, Baramulla. Even I come from Rajasthan, but I really like to roam around. Okay? My message to Kashmiris is that I think now blaming others, blaming Delhi, blaming Pakistan, or anyone else, it's perfectly fine. But this is the time to reflect, to introspect. There is something which is deeply internal and which is very wrong. Okay? I must say that Kashmiri people should admit the fact that drug menace is a big problem. Okay? Religious extremism is a big problem, and there should be no attempts to defend them, to justify them. Even if the mainstream Indian intellectuals, the journalists, scholars, if they are writing against the ban of Jamaat-e-Islam, people should come up in forefront, and they should say that this Maududi's political Islam is not the true spirit of Islam or the Kashmiri Sufi Islam. This is the biggest attack, biggest, I would say, destruction, ruination of the Kashmiri tradition and culture. Sheikh Sahab fought against these people for years, for decades, and Sheikh Sahab was the politically popular mass leader of Kashmir. Thirdly, Kashmiri people should understand that a lot of things happened because of their own people. Well, I mean, you cannot just say that Farooq Abdullah or the Mehbooba Mufti were Delhi's assets. After all, they were people, like, they were elected by Kashmiri people, and they come from they have roots in Kashmir. Like, just imagine Mehbooba Mufti, her entire electoral support base is Jamaat-e-Islami cadre, like in the South Kashmir. So, I mean, we cannot say that, you cannot just disown them. Okay? And the corruption, the poor governance, there were local Kashmiri officers in administration, in academia, in police, okay? They were also a party to that. I mean, who got salaries from the government of India after their retirement, or after it is generally said that from 9 a.m. in the morning to 4 p.m. in the evening, they are Indians, and after 4 p.m., they are Pakistanis. So that kind of duplicity cannot go. So the people, I must say, they should reflect. It is time to be serious about certain things, because ultimately this conflict, this bloodshed, this drug smuggling is doing the biggest damage to the people of Kashmir. All the international actors, be it China, Turkey, Pakistan, India, okay, I mean, frankly speaking, we know how states function, and it really doesn't bother them. It is the people of Kashmir who have the biggest stakes in Kashmir, and they should start thinking about, ask for the right things to Delhi. Ask genuine and right questions to Delhi, so that people from the rest of the India will come in the favor of their genuine grievances. Here with this, I end, and I would like to thank Dr. Kugelman, Bashir Saab, Joyeeta ji, and Bipindra ji, and all the participants.